I welcome everyone. I'm glad that you can be with us today as we begin our second week of looking at Genesis. Before we do that, though, we'll do our Father in prayer. We want to remember Aaron Davis, who is still in the hospital. Young Aaron, 11 years old, has issues with his kidneys that are affecting his parts of his body are swollen as a result because it's not apparently filtering proteins properly or something of that nature. And but he is under medication. I think he's supposed to get out tomorrow. He's supposed to get out Friday, but it's been extended this week. So we're going to remember him. Who else do we want to think of in our prayer today? Michelle? Is she sick? Michelle Holman? Michelle Holman is not feeling well, so we'll remember her. Others? Let's go to our Father in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for another day on this earth, another opportunity to gather together and study your word, another opportunity to be with those of like mind, like heart. Dear Father, that we take your word to our hearts and our minds and live it daily. Others will come to know you through your words and our deeds. We're thankful, Father, for your Son, for his blood that cleanses, for the opportunity to gather together as your body. We can lift each other up and edify one another. We be the example for others. Father, we are mindful of many of our brethren and friends and family that are struggling in this life. Many that are having great difficulties. We know, Father, that you are aware of each and every single one. We're especially mindful, Father, of young Aaron Davis and the difficulties he is having. We pray that you be with him and those caring for him, and your will, Father, that these difficulties can be resolved, he can return to a normal life. Father, we pray that you be with his family as they struggle with caring for him and the other children. We pray that you continue to bless them abundantly. We're mindful, Father, of many of our family and friends that are sick, especially Michelle Holman and others that are having difficulties. We pray that you be with them and be your will that they can return to a normal course of health and live life and giving you the glory. Thank you, Father, for this very day you've given us. We pray we use it to your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. So we began last week our study of Genesis. And as I mentioned last week, we talked about really said Genesis is the book that we normally think of, book of Genesis. It's really, let's not forget, a collection, a part of a collection of five-volume set. The Torah, law, the guidance, right guidance, and instruction, as well as also referred to as the Pentateuch, the 5 books or 5 volumes. But it functions as a set, not independent of each other, but as a set. And so Genesis really functions more of an introduction, really to all of Scripture, but specifically to the Torah or the Pentateuch, the first 5 books. Part of Exodus and all of Genesis functions in that manner. And so it's important to think about, especially when you try to look at things like who wrote it. We went through looking at Moses being the author and other perspectives in that regard. We showed that Moses is the author. And also, importantly, for us to recognize that when Genesis is written, it's written to a group of people that are about to enter the promised land, the land of Canaan, crossing over the Jordan River. And they come from a background as well as, coming from Egypt, as well as coming into an area in which there are various creation myths, pagan myths about creation. And so Genesis 1, at least in one perspective, provides a polemical or a counter to the various pagan views of creation. Those views were typically very combative. They were typically filled with lots of magic, and they typically would explain the origin of God or the gods, and the origin of humanity and the purpose we serve. And one of the things that those ancient Near Eastern pagan mythologies about creation would do is it would describe the function of each. The function of the gods, the various gods, what their function was, the function of humanity serving these gods, these type of things. It really emphasized the function. But of course, Genesis 1, and historically, the liberal scholars would have tradition or historically viewed as Genesis 1 sort of a growth from those pagan mythologies. They've abandoned that idea over the years. They no longer look at Genesis 1 as a outgrowth of those pagan mythologies, but specifically they recognize that Genesis 1 is a limit or contrast countering those pagan mythologies. And I'll talk a little bit more about that today. Genesis allows us to know God. To know God's wisdom. Specifically Genesis 1, 2, 3, all of Genesis. His wisdom, His power, and His love. And in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, we see God's creation and His love. We see man's transgression. We see God's divine punishment and God's divine mercy represented over and over throughout Genesis. And so as we begin our study in Genesis, we mentioned last week that Genesis can be divided really into two main components. The primeval narratives, that is chapters 1 through 11. The primeval narratives focus predominantly on the creation events, where humanity is the focal point of all creation. We'll talk more about that next week. And we see that humanity is depicted in two groups as we move through Genesis chapter 3, 4, 5, 6, and through 9 and others. We see humanity is divided really into two groups in this primeval narrative. Number one is those who walk away from God, whose heart is not aligned with God's ways. Number two are those who walk with God, those whose heart are aligned with God. And so there's this contrast that exists in Genesis, and we'll look at that as we move forward. But it's a story of transgression, a story of punishment, a story of mercy. So the first 11 chapters we'll spend the vast majority of our time focusing on. That's where the greatest controversies exist. That's where there's a lot more depth with regard to understanding Christ's salvation, the plan of salvation for us. But we also see God's plan of salvation for us in chapters 12 through 50 with the ancestral narratives, with the patriarchs. So we'll spend some time looking at that in that regard. But tonight we want to begin our examination of chapter 1 and how others interpret these verses, specifically those who desire to harmonize science with the Bible. Is the Bible a scientific textbook? Probably not. We wouldn't ask people to study, the Old Testament science and the New Testament science. It's not intended to be, nor is it designed to be a scientific textbook. But yet many people try to understand, try to harmonize biblical references to science, especially Genesis 1, probably one of the most studied chapters in all the Bible, and science. We live in a very technologically advanced world today, and there's a great desire to harmonize science and the Bible. And especially we are losing a lot of young people in the church. When you think about science, science is considered to be something that's factual, that's proven, it's tangible, there's evidence for it, it's observed, there's experiments that you can validate, and this type of thing. But then we come to the Bible, especially creation account, and it's not verifiable. It's not, it can't be recreated in these type of things. One thing I want to mention I talked to a young guy a few months ago. I was preaching somewhere else, and we were talking about the subject, and he came up and says, in school, they tell me all this about science and this about science. And I said, well, understand. Number one, science cannot prove or disprove the creation account. It's not the purpose, it's not capable of doing it. It's an impossibility. The reason is, the function of science is to, let me make sure I got the right words, is to study the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experimentation. Well, science is designed to recreate or to validate and verify by studying observations and looking to see if it occurs over and over in a systematic, continual way. Well, you can't do that with creation. It's not a possibility. It's a one-time event. So science theorizes what occurs. Unfortunately, many in the world today, the religious world included, want to take theory, often as fact, and try to harmonize the Word of God. And when they're not able to do that, or they don't feel comfortable with it, they give greater priority to science than God's Word. It's like the tail wagging the dog. And ultimately, we lose a lot of people as a direct result. So in our study of Genesis 1 today, we want to look at the text there, but I want to look at it in relationship to how some people view the harmonizing science. Let's start with some of our Bibles. If you have your Bible, look at Genesis chapter 1, and just look at the format, the way it's structured. Is there a difference as on the screen here between the NIV and the New King James? In its format, in its structure. Can you see a difference? I put the dark black line towards the vertical lines there to try to highlight those differences. You notice the New King James is predominantly left justified, other than its paragraph, first line is indented so many points or whatever. But on the NIV, the majority of the text, the very first line is left justified, but the majority of text is moved indented to some degree, and some lines indented more than others. That's referred to as poetic form. There's a difference in narrative structure between poetic form and prose. Prose being, discussion or stories or whatever the case may be. Various narrative forms. And the New King James, as many Bibles do, traditionally has presented the Genesis chapter 1 in a prose form, like we see in the New King James. Everything's left justified. But more recently, in the last 7-8 years, well, since 2011, when this NIV came out, they structure it differently. And they structure it with poetic form. What is the implication and the impact of structuring in a poetic form? Is there any difference? Does it imply any difference?
You're saying it's less factual. It's more poetic, meaning fantastic.
Thank you, Libby. Poetry, we all heard there's a license to, what's the word? Poetry is a license to? A poetic license, thank you. And poetry is not necessarily unfactual, but it has a license to maybe be more hyperbolic or to exaggerate or to give, well, let's take like the Proverbs, for example. We all know the Proverbs of train up a child the way to go, and he will not depart from it. Well, that's not an absolute statement. It's not intended to be absolute. It's a general axiom. Well, poetry functions similar. It's not to be absolute in all cases. And so the implication is that maybe Genesis 1 isn't history. Maybe it's something that can be looked at from a non-historical perspective, even a poetic perspective. The difficulty in the structure that they have is that not one single element of Hebrew poetry, not one, not parallelism, not the other elements, not one single element exists in Genesis chapter 1. It goes directly to creating a mindset that it's not necessarily history you're reading here. Now, traditionally, Genesis 1 has been looked at as history. But more recently, in the last several ever since Darwinism, with the intent to try to find a way to harmonize it, then it becomes, if we can look at Genesis 1 as something other than history, then I don't have to harmonize science with Genesis chapter 1. Because it's not reality, it's not history, it's poetic form. And so some Bibles and some more evangelical scholars today are teaching more along these lines. And I want us to be aware of that, because I can almost be assured that this same teaching is going to permeate in the Lord's church in the next 5 to 7 years. And most certainly our children or grandchildren probably see or hear something along this nature. So as we look, let's understand about what Genesis 1 is talking about. Let's focus on Genesis 1 and verse 2 first. Genesis 1 reads, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters." Now, in verse 1, we see effectively a summary statement of all totality of creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, it gives the totality of all God's creation in one simple summary statement. In Genesis 2, the earth was formless and void. It gives us a picture of an unstructured earth that did not have any form, was not in, let's just say it's unstructured. And darkness was over the surface of the deep. That is, darkness, we understand, often gives a picture of emptiness or even evil. And, if you think about those first hearers of the word, they recognize, think of darkness in the light of chaos, or more of light of evil. And one of the interesting things about these verses, especially when we get to verses 3 and following, where God names the darkness, well, he gives it a name. He calls it what? Night. Well, that's defining or giving understanding that God has sovereign authority over darkness. Well, if you come from a community where darkness represented evil, what does it say about the one true sovereign God? He has authority over even all evil in the darkness. He is sovereign. Anyway, darkness over the surface of the deep. Now, the deep represented often chaos, especially to the ancient Near Eastern people. You don't have very many Jews in the Old Testament riding in the ocean waves. They could go sea voyaging, like Tom did for a few years. You don't see any Jews doing that. You see one Jew that actually goes, in the Old Testament, that actually goes to sea. Who's that? Jonah, right? He did it to escape God. What does it say about how much he was trying to get away from God? Because they feared the deep. They feared the chaos that existed, or believed existed in that area. And so, here, from their perspective, here the darkness is over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. God was in control, even of the darkness and the deep, where chaos existed and evil existed. Many people have taken verses 1 and 2 and created what's referred to as the gap theory. You ever heard of the gap theory? Take verse 1, split it verse 1 and 2, and split it right down the middle between the two verses, and insert billions of years. By inserting billions of years, you find a way to harmonize the theory of evolution, theistic evolution. You find a way to harmonize, where did the dinosaurs come from? When dinosaurs, we need all these billions of years for this to occur. Well, they insert the billions of years right there. And they'll also find reasons to, in that insertion of billions of years, to justify or give understanding of, the death and pain and suffering and all these type of things. And the premise is that in the first verse, God created everything, and it was pristine. It was perfect. But yet, something happened over the billions of years, and it degraded to such a point that God had hit the reset button. That's the theory that's taught here. And it helps to justify and harmonize theistic evolution with the biblical account of creation. Now, you really don't see this in the English version. We read, in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth, and the earth was formless and void. You really don't see that. But in the Hebrew, they find justification to make this true. And without getting too deep into it, let me point out a couple of things. Just as an example, I borrowed Brother Bill's cane. And in the Hebrew, there's a letter called vav. Vav looks like this cane. The word pretty much looks like this shape. That's what a vav is. Now, a vav cannot stand alone. It will not be able to stand by itself. It has to be attached to another word. In other words, like Bill, it has to have someone holding on to it. And the vav has multiple functions. kills Cain, he can walk with it and support him, as well as if he gets tired of Rodney talking back at him, he can pop him across the head. If he feels like he can make his golf game, he can use it for his golf game, or if he wants to play a little baseball. So Bob can have multiple functions, just like this Cain can have multiple functions. Well, one of the primary functions of the letter Bob is to attach to a word, and depending on what the word is attached to, whether it's a noun or whether it's some other adjective or something, and depending upon its location, it can function differently. It can function as a conjunction. What a conjunction is, right? Conjunction is to join together. Well, typically, we translate conjunctions as and this, and that, and this. Well, that's one function of a Bob. It has many functions. Another function of a Bob is a disjunction. What's a disjunction? It's the opposite of conjunction, is to break apart. And so there's no doubt that the Bob in verse 2, very first letter in verse 2, attached to the words Baharetz, which is and the earth, or most English Bibles just say the earth. I think the King James will have and the earth. NIV and a few other Bibles, Home Christian Standard Bible, has now the earth. They're trying to emphasize that disjunction, that breaking apart. What the gap theorists want to do is they want to say, well, that disjunction is one that's separating billions of years. It's chronological. But the context here doesn't justify that. The context here specifically focuses on the Bob functioning as a disjunction to be something like we read in chapter 2, or chapter 2 verse 4, I think it is. Or is it, no, 3 and verse 1. Yeah, 3 and verse 1. Same thing here, chapter 3, verse 1. Most Bibles say what? Now, the serpent was more clear, crafty than the beast of the field which the Lord had made. Lord God had made. Now, the Bob here functions as a disjunction to say, and in the beginning, the Lord God made the heavens and the earth. Stop. And now it's for the earth. See, verse 1 talks about all of creation. Heavens and the earth. Now let's stop and focus on the earth. And when you read chapter 1, what's it talking about? Creation of the earth. God doesn't talk about the creation of the heavens. He talks about the creation of the earth. So that's how it functions. So those that want to, and there are other things. For example, we won't go any deep for time, but there are a couple other things that they'll use. For example, in the same chapter, the same verse, verse 2, the earth was formless and void. The was, a Hebrew word, hayah, basically can mean to be or become. And so they'll say, well, the earth became formless and void. Well, no, not in this context. And so they use the Hebrew. And this has become very popular, especially because, let's face it, a lot of us don't really know any Hebrew. And so it's hard to refute. But they'll use the Hebrew to justify a billions of years between verses 1 and 2. If you want more information about that, Dr. Justin Rogers wrote a great article. It's on Apologetics Press. Go to Apologetics Press and just search for Justin Rogers. You'll see many of his articles there. One of them deals with his gap theory. And he talks specifically about the Bob there. So we won't spend any more time with that. But understand that that theory exists. And Bill, do you want this back? You want to keep your Bob with you? Verses 3 through, I think it's, where's the last time? What the next day? I can't remember. But 3 and following, we hear over and over, verse 5, God called the light day, and darkness he called night, and there was evening, and there was morning one day. In verse 8, and God called the expanse of heaven, and there was evening, and there was morning a second day. In verse 13, and there was evening, and there was morning a third day. And verse 19, and there was evening, and there was morning a fourth day. And then verse 23, there was evening, and there was morning a fifth day. And in verse 31, and God saw all that he made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning a sixth day. Well, some people want to harmonize, want to put 1,000,000,000 years in that day. What does 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8 say? I think it's 8. 2 Peter chapter 8, or chapter 3, in verse 8.
But beloved, do not forget this one thing, that with the Lord 1 day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as with 1 day.
Beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years 1 day. Well, here, then people want to say, oh, a day can be not just 1,000 years, but 1,000,000,000 or more years. And so 6 days, so certain billions of years. And it seems like it might make some sense because there's some scriptural reference to show or correlation to show that. And ultimately what people would do is use that as a basis to insert and harmonize their view of science with the Bible instead of harmonizing the Bible with science. They would do the reverse. The problem with that is, and we won't spend a lot of time with it, but the problem with that is in English, certainly day can have multiple time references. Back in my day, when was that? Not some specific 24-hour period, but some time frame in which I grew up and I walked uphill going to school and uphill coming home type of thing. So in the snow. You've heard those stories. So day can refer to more than just a 24-hour period. In Hebrew, the same thing. They again go to the Hebrew. Hebrew can certainly, the word is yom, and yom, excuse me, not yom. Yom is sea and yom is day. And they specifically will show that, well, yom, a day, can be an undefined period of time. It could also be a 24-hour period. How do we know that these verses refer to a specific 24-hour period or an undefined period of time? Well, it's written in the text. Number one, two things. The second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day are ordinal numbers. The first day, or second day, third day, it's cardinal number would be number 1, 2, 3, 4. Those ordinal numbers, second, third, fourth, fifth, are never anywhere in the Bible used for, when it's associated with day. It's never associated with anything but a 24-hour period, unless this is the exception. So, throughout all of the Old Testament, the reference to Yom with regard to a ordinal number, first, second, third, fourth, or fifth, is always a 24-hour period, unless this is the exception. Additionally, how does every single one of these verses end with regard to the first day, second day, third day, and it was morning and evening? I forget the number of instances that each one of those words occur and how many times they occur collectively. It's a few hundred. In every single case, it refers to a 24-hour period. So those who want to use this to inject billions of years don't take their Hebrew study far enough to see that it's not possible. There's not a single Hebrew scholar that would say Genesis 1, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, can possibly be anything but in a 24-hour period, and not billions of years. Now, we will say that on the day 1, it doesn't say first day. It says 1 day. Or 1 day is an ordinal number. That could refer to something beyond a 24-hour period. However, it also ends with morning and evening. So there's no way it can refer to anything but a 24-hour period. So those who want to use this as a reason to justify and harmonize their science with the Bible have turned it around. I want to look at one more thing. And as we do this, we'll dive more into the scripture here. Let's read verses. We typically read this in a sequential order, verses 1 through 31. By the way, today we're only going to go through verse 25. Yeah. I want to say 26 and following the next week as we focus on the image of God, God's creation of humanity. Notice, though, that when you get to the creation of humanity, much more scripture is presented with regard to the creation of humanity, male and female. the emphasis seems to be that all of creation or that Christian humanity was the pinnacle, the peak, the very purpose of God's creating all the earth and the universe is for you and I. And we'll talk more about that next week. But let's go through verse 24, or 25. The only difference is I don't want to read it in order. I want to read it. The question some people will bring up is, well, did God create the earth as material? You know, earth has wood and has fire and has water. Those are material things. Or if you look at the ancient Near Eastern creation myths, they're about functions oftentimes. And so there's some scholars today, it's becoming very popular, that are saying, well, Genesis 1 is really not about creating material. It's about creating functions. The sun has a function. The moon has a function. Humanity has a function. And so in such, because it's not really about creating material, because it doesn't address creating material, then we don't have to worry about harmonizing science with Genesis 1. Because it's not about material at all. Science can say the earth is 10 billion years old, or it can say it's a day old. Genesis 1 doesn't talk to that. That's the perspective they have. And let's look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 3 through 5. And let's look how it correlates, this light and darkness, how it correlates with verses 14 through 19. So we're going to look at 3 through 5 and 14 through 19. You'll read with me. Verse 3. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. And verse 14. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens, to give light on the earth. And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening, and there was morning, a fourth day. So day 1 correlates with the creation of light and darkness, with the separation of darkness and light, correlates with functions that are giving in day 4. Well, there's clear that does that. We're not arguing that point. It's interesting to see that God created the light and day, and he gave it names, called the light day, and he called the darkness night. Well, that says God has authority. He is sovereign. He is ruler over it. Because he can name it. He created it. It is interesting that in verses 14 and following, he talks about the purpose. The heavens, the lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and for signs, and for seasons, and for days, and for years. What is signs, seasons, days, and years refer to? What is the purpose of the night, the night and the day? To separate, to give signs for season and for days and years. Well, most of that is calendar time, right? Well, how did the ancient Near Eastern people know when to plant the seed? Or which seed to plant? By the phases of the moon, right? By the stars and such. These function in a way for them to know when the festivals were. These function in a way to know them when certain events would occur. It created a pattern of events that they could follow. And so we see that there's a purpose for giving light and day, or day and darkness, where the light separates the darkness, so that they can then have signs, seasons, days, and years, so that they can then function in order to achieve a goal. Specifically, science is a little different. Science is not really calendar specific. Science is something you might point to You might use the sun or the moon or the stars as a sign of a time or an event type of thing. So it's, and then God made two lights, the greater light and the lesser light. What would those be? Sun and the moon, right. It's interesting, the ancient years and people did not necessarily associate the light of the sun or light with the sun. Why not? You and I automatically associate light with the sun. Right? We know that. Light and day. Well, if you ever wake up early in the morning before the sun rises, you see the dawn of the day and the beauty coming across the land, what you don't see is the sun. You see the light coming. Because we know the earth is round and spinning, and there's a horizon that you can see. And as the sun rises, you don't necessarily see the sun, but you see its light coming over the horizon. The same thing with dusk. At dusk, as the sun sets, we call it the sun setting, but it really doesn't set. That's phenomenal language. And as the sun sets, again, once the sun gets below the horizon of view, you still have the light. Beautiful light, but no sun. And so your eye recognizes light, but not necessarily correlated to the sun. It's interesting when people try to look at science in the Bible calls it the lesser light and the greater light. It doesn't call it a sun. We know the sun to be a star, right? It's a star. Like all the stars in the sky, they give off light. Well, certainly they didn't know in that day that it was a star. And oftentimes people will say, well, the Bible misrepresents science. Well, no. The Bible calls it, because it doesn't call it a star. Well, no, the Bible calls it a greater light and a lesser light, which is true. The lesser light, so well, see, the moon doesn't give off light. We know the moon does not emanate, or does not give off light. It reflects light. We know that today. Yet it's still a lesser light. The Bible is written to harmonize with science. I don't say it's written to harmonize with science. What the Bible says about science harmonizes with science in every generation. It's written generically enough that it would agree with those who did not have a greater understanding of the lesser light or greater light or any portion of science. But yet it's written in such a way that it still agrees with no matter what we come to understand of reality with regard to science. That the sun is really a star. Okay, still gives off light, doesn't it? And these type of things. So I just find that interesting and want to bring that out as we discuss this. The other piece that correlates, of course, is verses 6 through 8, which speaks about the waters and the expanse of the firmament. And it correlates with verses 20 through 23. So verses 6 through 8. Then God said, let there be an expanse. Your Bible might have firmament. Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. God made the expanse and separate the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so. God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening, morning, and there was morning, and a second day. In verses 14 through, verses 20 through, where am I at? Let me see. Verses 20 through 23. Then God said, let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens. God created the great sea monsters and the living creatures that moves with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind, and God saw it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. There was evening and morning and a fifth day. So verses 6 through 8 correlate creating the waters, separating the waters from the expanse. Then in verses 20 and following, it depicts the waters being filled and the air, the expanse being filled with God's creation. In verses 6 through 8, it speaks about this great expanse. Your Bible might have firmament. What's this expanse and what's this firmament? The sky, okay? The firmament is actually from the Latin firmamentum, and it's really as if it's a solid material. Why would they consider it a solid material? It's like taking a piece of sheet metal and keep pounding it, and what happens? It begins to get thinner and thinner and spreads out. It becomes so thin, but yet it functions as a solid piece of material. That's how it's viewed, okay? And so what's above the firmament? Okay, what else is above the firmament? Sorry? Water. Let the expanse, the firmament, separate the waters from above from the waters from below. And so the perspective was the waters above were above this firmament. And below were the waters that were the seas and the rivers and the oceans and such like this. And then in the waters below, what does God do? He creates living beings. Let's skip the part because I think correlates with 23, right? Okay. So he creates living beings, those that are in the expanse, in the upper area, which would be the birds flying in the air, as well as those in the sea. So imagine the air with nothing in it, and then God creates living beings, the birds. Imagine the sea calm with nothing in it, and then storm, or what's the word used? Swarms so it's like you ever seen, like they throw chum in the water and you see all this water bubbling. All of a sudden there's all this activity in the waters. Here's one of the interesting things I find about it, maybe you will. In verse 22, God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the waters and the seas and let the birds multiply on the earth. What's the blessing? Procreation. Increase. God blessed them to do what? To fill. To fill the waters and to fill the skies. We'll look at the next section here. And we have in verses 9 through 13, which correlates with verses 24 and following. 9 through 13. And God said, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place. Let the dry land appear, and it was so. And God called the dry land earth. And the gathering of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. And then God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, fruit trees, and the earth bearing fruit of their kind with seed in them. And it was so. And the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after its kind, and the trees bearing fruits with seed in them and after their kind. And God saw that it was good, and it was morning, it was evening, and there was morning a third day. Before I move on, notice that there are two events that occur here. There's the water separating so the dry land appears, and then there's vegetation, growth on the land, and brought forth vegetation plants and seed yielding its kind, trees bearing fruit, seeds in them after their kind. God saw that was good. Correlate that to verse 4 through 25. Then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of their kind. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth of their kind, and cattle and their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. So the waters separate, the land becomes, dry land becomes visible, and then on the dry land becomes vegetation, and then God creates more living creatures. He creates all the domestic animals, the cattle is referred to. That's not just cattle, that's all domestic animals. He creates all the wild beasts, which would be the beasts of the land, and he creates all the creeping, crawling things, those things that we like to step on, type of thing. So all this is created and correlates with the waters and dry land coming back up. The net probably came when the lands were separated after the Great Flood. I don't know. No, let's turn it on. There is some truth. We have traditionally looked at creation as a creation of a material existence. That's been the traditional view. But there is some truth to God creating functions. But it's not exclusively functions. We can look more at why it's not true. But it is good to recognize that God created material things that have function. That makes sense. They're not exclusively a function. Why would they want something to be exclusively a function? Again, if it's not material, then it doesn't have to agree with science. So we'll talk a little more about this and we'll finish Genesis chapter